Good morning. Welcome back to Daybreak. It's now 24 minutes past 6 o'clock. And joining us this morning is John LeBlanc from Washington, D.C. and Dr. Tom Wolf, who is here in Nairobi. Of course, many of you would know him. But I want to begin with you, Joanna. We've seen the two candidates in the U.S. election, Joe Biden and President Trump, of course, crisscrossing different states in that country. What is the home stretch looking like in this campaign as we wait for the election tomorrow?
First and foremost, thank you so much, Sam, for having me on. As you know, general election here in the U.S. is on November the 3rd. The polls, some of the polls rather, seem to predict that candidate Joe Biden is going to win the election. But we don't really know, because we saw what happened in 2016. The popular vote went to Hillary, but yet President Donald Trump won the election. And that is because in the United States, you have what you call the Electoral College, where you may not have the popular vote, but with enough electorate votes, such as 270, you can win the election. And right now, when you look at some of the major states like Florida, California, Texas, and New York, Biden tend to be leading in those states. So we're not sure what's going to happen. I think it is going to be a close call, and only on November 3rd that we will actually know exactly who's the winner. And even then, I think because there are so many people voting through absentee ballots because of the COVID-19 pandemic, and in an attempt to kind of curb the virus, folks are not voting in person. So it's going to take some time to count those ballots as well. So we may not have all the results on November 3rd.
Right, and I don't know whether you were able to closely observe the 2016 election that, of course, a majority of the national polls were showing that Hillary was going to win, but she didn't, of course, despite having won the popular vote by more than 3 million votes. So have the dynamics changed in this election, and what would you point that change to? Is it about the candidate they have, or what is it?
Well, what I can tell you is that, again, I think we're seeing a lot of people are excited about voting. I think this year we will have a turnout that is greater than in the past 50 years. I think we're going to have a 62% voter turnout. And in particular, folks between the ages of 18 through, I believe, 25 are going out and they're voting. But we don't know what that will translate into ultimately. But we know people are excited and they want to be involved, which is a good thing.
Okay, all right. And Dr. Tom, of course, you're an American citizen. I don't know whether you voted this time round, but if I may trace back the roots to some conversation I had with you sometime in 2016, you are not very happy that Trump won. Do you think that his performance in office is a key determinant to him winning the election, or are there other dynamics that will be at play tomorrow and already in the voting that has already taken place?
Difficult question. Well, first, yes, I am a registered member of the Democratic Party in the state of Michigan, so I should be clear about that. Yes, I have voted. I've received my ballot as an email attachment from my township board in Oakland County, Michigan, and filled it out, and then it was sent through the U.S. Embassy Postal Service here. They provided that service for resident Americans, even those of us who are not working for the U.S. government. So I hope to, at some point, get confirmation from my township that they received the ballot. As you may have heard, the Trump-appointed Postmaster General in the U.S. has been doing everything he can to slow down the mail, and Democrats in different states have gone to court, including the elected officials in some states controlled by Democrats, to have this de facto slowdown of the U.S. Postal Service overturned. Anyway, we'll see how that turns out. But just in terms of your last question, which is a very big one, we could talk about it for a long time. But let me just give a short answer. I think there are a couple of obvious factors which make this election different from 2016. The main one being, of course, that Donald Trump is an incumbent. He cannot package himself simply as an outsider, meaning all things to all people who had any degree or type of dissatisfaction with the status quo. He has a record to run on. Of course, Joseph Biden, the former vice president and longtime senator before that, also has a record to run on. So neither one can be seen as an outsider. And I'm sure when this election is over, really whatever the result, it will go down in history as the coronavirus election for a number of reasons. Some that Johanna mentioned, all the early voting, whether by post or people queuing, where they can do that. And we have now, I think it's more than 60% of all the people who voted in the last election have already voted. So that's one of the reasons that I agree with her. We're going to have record turnout. Just how high it goes, we'll have to see. But the fact that the U.S. not only has globally the highest number of cases, the highest number of deaths, but also those figures in terms of per capita, in terms of U.S. population, that's really, I think, is going to define this election, and that's the main reason I think Trump will lose. In fact, it raises the question, had it not been for the coronavirus, how likely would it have been for any challenger, whether Joseph Biden or anybody else, to defeat him? But that's a hypothetical, so we really don't know. Of course, there are other issues in his record that will affect, but as I say, there's a huge difference. And just the other thing is that we all know from polling related to 2016 that Hillary Clinton had a great deal of sort of negatives in her perceived profile or her perceived political and personal personality. And Joseph Biden doesn't have those. The reasons for that, that's another issue. But I think this election, even if one of the two candidates is the same as last time, is very, very different from what happened 4 years ago.
Okay, all right. And John, of course, the last time that an incumbent lost re-election, I think it was the time of George W. Bush, the senior. And will this election be determined by issues, specifically issues based on performance of President Trump? Or what are the other issues that will be at play, apart from the COVID-19 and the handling that Tom Wolf is talking about?
I think the doctor made it very clear, and I agree with him. I think this election is because of the global health crisis and how it has impacted America in a way that it has not impacted the rest of the world. I mean, America, as the most prosperous nation in the world, has been the most impacted. And it's not because we don't have the appropriate infrastructures and we don't have the science, we don't have the resources to have properly responded to this pandemic. It boils down to, regardless of your political position, leadership, right? And so I think this election is going to be about the impact that this pandemic has had on the United States economy, as well as the incumbent's ability to respond to it accordingly. Now, some are arguing that race will play a factor because we saw during the pandemic there was a racial unrest due to systemic oppression and suppression of people of color in America. But I don't think that's going to play as big of a role in this election than the COVID-19 pandemic.
Right. And of course, we're talking about those people that have been voting by post. How much time is it going to take? Because I've seen some of the stories saying that it might take longer than the election night. Are Americans prepared for such, and how are they trying to ensure that they're able to deal with all the tallying and what have you ahead of time?
First and foremost, Sam, we've never been here before as a country. There is no framework, there is no blueprint on how to conduct an election in the middle of a global health crisis. We just never dealt with such. So I think our elected officials and our leaders are doing the absolute best that they can, and I think we should give them some credit. But at the same token, there's a lot of conversation around voter suppression. Like in certain communities, why does it take 4 hours to vote versus in others 30 minutes? For example, where I live, I went and voted and within 10 minutes, I was in and out, right? And also there are litigation around the mail-in ballots. When's the last day should someone send in their mail-in ballots? And different states have different laws and different policies. So there's litigation already around this exact topic. And because of that, we're just not going to have all of the ballots tallied and counted on November 3rd.
Okay, all right. And of course, Dr. Tom Wolf, you know that in this country, since the election of 2008 of President Barack Obama, of course, Kenyans have been watching the U.S. elections closely, more than they did ever before. But that interest appears to be dwindling. What will a win for Biden or for Trump change the fortunes for Kenyans, and how that perception about the U.S. is affected?
Sam, just before we get to that, I would like to make a brief comment, follow up to what Yana said. Yes, I think we both agree that the coronavirus pandemic and the response to it is the overarching, sort of defining issue of the election. But let's not forget there are many other factors which I think will contribute to Trump's defeat, of course, assuming he loses. First of all, remember that in the Republican primary elections, the nominations, as you call them here, in 2016, among all the Republicans who were trying to get that nomination to run for president, and there were at least a dozen, I can't remember the number, Trump ended up with only 38% of the total vote, and yet won that nomination. And that's because, whereas the Democrats in their primary elections have a proportional system, where the delegates within their party from each state are apportioned after that primary election according to the percentage that each of the candidates received. And you remember that main contest was between Hillary Clinton and Senator Bernie Sanders. The Republicans have a first-past-the-post winner-take-all system. So it was possible for Trump to get that nomination, as I said, with only 38% of the overall Republican primary vote.
Right.
So he came in, without a very strong stand within his own Republican Party. Now, of course, once he became the candidate, people lined up behind him, even if, again, as Johanna said, and you also said, he won that election with about 2% less of the popular national vote than Hillary Clinton, which was within the margin of error of the national polls, I should say. Maybe we can talk about polls again in a minute. But there are a number of other issues related to Trump's performance over the last 4 years that have caused very, very serious doubts, even within sections of his own Republican Party, let alone more generally.
Right.
We've had more people convicted of crimes associated with Trump and his campaign and his behavior in office than I think any other president, at least in my memory. In Obama's 8 years, there were none. And we have also a number of cases that are still in court related to illegal activity. And in several of these cases, the president himself has been named as a potential indictee. It's only that interpretation within the Department of Justice does not allow the president to be charged in court while he's serving, which raises very, very serious issues as to how this president is going to behave in the 10 weeks between the election and the swearing in of Joe Biden, if Biden wins, to protect himself against future legal action. But we've had a number of people in the national security community, both in the military and civilians, who have come out publicly to warn about the threat that Donald Trump poses to U.S. national security. And within the U.S. as well, in terms of right-wing militias and others who have already been seen to be prepared to act outside the law. So, we have a number of issues which have arisen aside from coronavirus. Now, coming back to, and Johanna mentioned the race issue, that's also very important. Even if most people who are committed to the implementation of the civil rights that are on the books and in the U.S. Constitution would have been assumed to vote Democratic anyway. But I think there are many people who have voted Republican over the years and voted for Trump and may vote for him now who are uneasy about these extrajudicial police killings of African Americans,
but Tom,
whatever the circumstances.
Tom, specifically to the question of what this will mean for countries like Kenya and East African region, what do you think it is? Yeah, well,
I have not been following closely the implementation of policy on the ground in Kenya, but what I can say, first of all, is that by and large, and especially in a country like Kenya, where the vast bulk of U.S. assistance is in the area of counterterrorism because of the al-Shabaab threat, that at least at that level, I don't expect to see any major change whether Trump is reelected or whether he is replaced by Joe Biden. Now, we do have, of course, the situation where the current U.S. ambassador is a political appointee rather than a career State Department official.
Okay.
Even if he had previous experience in the country in another capacity in the religious NGO sector for his work in East Mount Kenya.
Right.
He would likely be replaced by I would think, a State Department, a career official. Okay. How much of what has been happening in Kenya since Ambassador McCarter was appointed can be attributed particularly to him or his relationship to the Republican Party or to President Trump? Okay. I mean, I leave for others who know more details, but I wouldn't expect there to be much difference, except perhaps in one key area, and that is in family planning. We know that within the Republican Party as it is now, the Trump-Pence, Vice President Mike Pence administration, there is an almost an absolute commitment against abortion under any circumstances. Okay. And we do know that safe abortions, under whether the Marie Stopes clinic network or Planned Parenthood and so on, have had a major impact in Kenya on beginning, at least, to lower the fertility rate among Kenyan women, which is one of the main causes of poverty in this country. So there's been a cutting off of most, if not all, funds. I don't have the figures in front of me, through USAID in the area of family planning, to the extent that abortion has still been allowed in Kenya in certain circumstances.
All right, Tom. I will have to cut you short because I need to take the final take from Joanna. So, of course, we've seen several measures that have been put in place by President Trump, including the draw from the WHO and so many other issues about migration rules. But so if Joe Biden wins this election, is he likely to overturn some of the policies that have been implemented by President Trump, and what would that mean for Kenya, East Africa, and Africa?
A great question. I think it's very relevant because a lot of Kenyans want to know, why do we care about U.S. elections? And you care because foreign policy is about friendships, right? And I think Senator Kamala Harris, simplified the meaning of foreign policy during the last debate with Vice President Pence. She said foreign policy is friendship, doing what you said you're going to do for your allies and your friends. That simple. With that being said, currently under the Trump administration, there is Prosper Africa. It is a program that is designed to make it easier for the private sector to do business in Africa. So $60 billion has been allocated for that particular project. And currently $8 billion has been spent across the African continent for business ventures. And secondly, there is an emphasis on women entrepreneurship. So if there are women-held businesses, it is easier to get, well, not easier, rather, they make it a priority for those individuals to get loans. So I expect that such program will remain on the books, and programs like the AGOA, right, the trade agreement, which is very popular in Kenya and many other African countries. And I also think that the program is underutilized. I think it's going to continue, and I think the Mandela program is also going to continue. And I think that when you look at the continent as a whole, with 1.2 billion people with vast resources, I think the American government under a Biden administration would continue to work to strengthen bilateral and trade relations with various countries on the continent, including Kenya, to ensure peace and prosperity for all people on the African continent.
Okay, all right. Joanna LeBlanc, Dr. Tom Wolf, thank you so much both for having this conversation on the U.S. election. Of course, like I said, it's on tomorrow, and we'll be here at Citizen TV watching and seeing what happens. Of course, previously we've had the election night concluding on the morning of the following day. We don't know that this will be the case, but we'll wait, as we are told that the dynamics have changed in as far as that those people that voted via mail. those that will not be voting in person. We take a short break. When we return, we'll be having the conversation of what's happening in Kenya, and that is to do the Building Bridges Initiative report. Of course, there's that divide that is already emerging of those that say that it's time that we revisit it and change a few things that are contentious. Then there are those that are saying that it has to go through the next phase of action, which is to be pursued through a referendum, whether it's popular initiative or parliamentary initiative. We'll have that conversation with Caleb Kosita, a new member of parliament for Soy constituency. We'll have Fred Okango, who is already in studio, the Secretary General of the Third Way Alliance. We'll also have Ledama Olekina, who is the Senator for Narok, to have this conversation alongside Anthony Oloch, who is the member of parliament for Mathare constituency in Nairobi County. After the break.